Hey guys, my name is Rai. Today I wanted to talk about the key I healed in my Preservation Evoker, which is a plus 15 City of Threads. Again, compared to my last video, this is kind of a new group of people I've been playing with, although these are all friends and people I've played with in the past. This isn't normally my team or my set group. A couple of you did ask how I healed this key, specifically the third and the fourth boss, so I want to take this opportunity to go through this, as this is a key I just did yesterday. Again, no talent swaps here, I haven't changed anything, I'm still running Call of Usara, and this time I do have an augmentation, evoker, and a mage. Why that is important to note is I actually had a really big feeling of an increase in throughput in my key just due to the Arcane Intellect buff and having an aug. This is the second time I've healed this key on a plus 15, and the first time I did it I had no mage, no augmentation evoker, so it did feel a lot easier compared to the first time. On this first pack, one thing to note, and depending on what kind of trash your tank decides to pull in this route, the only thing you really have to worry about is making sure that you're healing up bolts, making sure that you're kicking where you can and using your utility, and setting up ramps for the Ravenous Swarm cast by the beetles. On this very first pack, because we have all our offensive CDs, I choose to really not pop it too much here. I decide not even to use stasis. I'm pretty much just using my pre-tip to scales, which I talked about in my Crimbatol video. Making sure I get my echoes out on every party, going into a lifeline window, and for every single one of the Ravenous Swarms, again, even though I'm running really low mastery, should be able to top everybody with just a Spirit Bloom, Life Spark proc, and your regular hots rolling from reversion. Unfortunately, there's a little bit of a hiccup in our run. Our team usually does skip this pack right next to us on the right, however, it did seem that we accidentally pulled it. So right off the bat here, this is a very hard pack, and we do not expect to play this. So we're using our damage buff, unfortunately, to fight this for the boss. So you can see we're sitting on Lust because we're waiting for the first boss, and I'm trying my best here to make sure I can heal through any of the missed kicks. So I do end up, spending like a lot of healing globals here as opposed to damage, just because at this key level, anybody that does take a bolt could perish pretty quickly. Anytime you're encountering this trash, one thing to look out for though, as you can see, is I do have a highlighted nameplates weak aura, which makes sure that when I see there's dispellable debuff on somebody, they do get highlighted. On this trash, making sure that you're not dispelling immediately is actually better than dispelling immediately. Healing the person for a tick and letting them move out of the group, I would recommend doing. I think a lot of bugs, especially in this trash, when I was playing my Demon Hunter or my Boomkin, I would find that healers would just dispel you immediately, people would get stunned, and people could die. Luckily, in this route, and I think a lot of the meta routes now for City of Threads, only involve playing one of these guys. This pack specifically has a very deadly overlap, which is the Ravenous Swarm, followed by the debuff dot. So that person needs to make sure that they have a defensive rolling, or you have something for them to make sure that they don't die while getting out of the group. As you can see, I let Hollow get out of the group, I dispel him, and I currently have a full ramp stasis. Nothing different than what I normally do, but, I do my echoes, my life bind, that time I hit Renew and Blaze, I let Giant Monster get out of the group, and we're back in. You should not find too much of a problem healing the Ravenous Swarm guards on Preservation. I think we have a lot of tools. Feel free though, this fight coming up is also a very low healing requirement, so if you need to use extra buttons to make sure that you can get through the trash, it's more than okay. One thing to note there, my Aug did rescue me out of my Spirit Bloom cast, and I was actually quite irritated with him because he almost let Giant Monster die. That's like a really bad case scenario, so if you're playing with an Augmentation Evoker, try to remind them not to rescue you as Preservation, as it will cancel your empowered casts. On this first boss, one thing to note, and again, this isn't a really big HPS requirement, but more a defensive check and a positioning check. As you can see, the first shadows come out, and in Discord, I'm calling that I'm going to dispel in 3, 2, 1, and I call a name. Do not dispel immediately, or at least the preference that I have is waiting for the first beam to go out. Giving everybody a second or two to make sure that they can get in position and not get clipped by the orbs is way more important than dispelling immediately. You should have some healing out, they should be using defensives, but more importantly, making sure that you have echoes on everybody and maybe even pre-casting a Spirit Bloom to make sure that they have some healing before you choose to dispel. I see the shadows now coming in 2 seconds. I'm calling out to my team. I'm dispelling 2, 1, and it's on me. I choose I'm going to dispel myself here. I move from the beam. I let hollows expire, and we're good to go. Following this cadence every time makes it so that, you know, the person that is not going to be dispelled has some time to get healed or press defensive, but more importantly too, this makes it so your team never has to get one shot by the orbs. Remember, on this fight, if your tank does get stunned by an orb and hit by a subjugate, he can just die. This boss specifically is kind of a tank check more than anything. There's very little HPS requirement, so making sure that your tank can live, using things like time dilation on him is very impactful. See, another beam comes out, I wait to dispel, I dispel a giant monster here, and we're back in the fight. Again, the HPS requirement is very low. I chose to communion there, but not for any particular purpose. I'm pretty sure you could let the entire AoE go off and everybody be fine. Good habits to use though, as you're practicing this boss and lower keys, is making sure you are using things like your renewing blaze, your scales, your rewind, and your communion. You're not going to need them at any other point in the key, so it's completely fine to use your buttons here to keep them up for the next couple minutes. So you can see I life bind, I release my tip to scales spirit bloom, and we're back at it. Again, I'm waiting for the line to go out, and I'm dispelling myself. Brisky does almost go down there. He didn't have a charge of scales. That would have been a really good point for me to either use rewind or use time dilation on him. Pardon me for my phone alarm that went off there. Again, now the first boss is dead. Our timer's okay. We did have that extra trash pack, which does nothing for our account in the dungeon, and we're off to the trash up here. One thing that can kind of catch you off guard with any of these emissaries that you're doing during the RP of City of Threads is that their Void Rush can actually be a lot of damage. Now, especially I remember doing this on beta, and when I started off the season, when I came back, not thinking about it, but as the key level went up, I started making sure I have a ramp for every Void Rush. So it comes out here, I have echoes on everybody, I hit my life bind, I hit my stasis, and I make sure that I get my spirit bloom out. As you can see, it was quite a lot of damage, and usually too, you'll end up seeing that my team uses defensives on almost every single Void Rush or alternates. But preservation has a really good trick, and again, it's that, you know, echo, 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 and then Spirit Bloom, or in that case, I just released my Stasis. Again, my Stasis isn't anything special here. It's the same old Spirit Bloom, TA, and Dream Breath. You'll find that pattern in a lot of keys because the same damage profile always exists this season. It seems to be like heavy rod up front over a couple seconds, which is completely negated by a big heal, and Lifebind tends to do the trick with that just perfectly. So I pop Renewing Blaze, and I got a Spirit Bloom out, and we got really lucky with that Void Rush because I think some of the Shaman's pets or mirror images ate some of the Void Rush ticks. So again, we're just kind of back in sequence here, prepping for the next Void Rush. I TA. I actually do something a little bit different this time, is I thought we were going to kill it, so I didn't set up a ramp, but that was a mistake. But TA seemed to be fine. We did have 2 rescues, and we're off to the next one. One thing to note, and a common trend, is if you are finding that you're falling behind on healing this trash, make sure that you're utilizing things like your rewind, your communion, and your tip to scales. You don't have to fight a boss here, and I knew in my head that I wouldn't for like another 3 minutes at least. So I'm kind of hanging out. If I need to press anything, it's more than fine. So you can see I did use scales a little bit before. I get my life bind out, I release my stasis, and my group's just completely top from the knife throws. Again, like I said, this damage can creep up in use, just make sure you're prepared. I wouldn't react reactively to this damage, I would always be proactive. It doesn't take much, just put a couple echoes out, and then Verdant Embrace into Lifebind, the first person to get Void Rushed, because you know multiple people are going to get targeted. So with that as a result, as soon as you start casting Spirit Bloom, chances are by the time you get to that 4th tick of the Empower cast, you're going to have multiple people hit anyway. I'm using Tip the Scales and cooldown here just for damage, getting my Echoes out, and 1 Void Rush on the tank. There it is. I use my Spirit Bloom, and my team stopped. Another nice thing though that I haven't really talked about in my other videos, and this was brought up, it was a question about Threads of Fate. Threads of Fate is the buff that your team members will receive after you cast Tip the Scales for 30 seconds. This does allow your team to receive a little bit of multi-strike, which means that every time you use an empowered cast after you cast Tip the Scales for 30 seconds, one of your team members will receive the Threads of Fate buff for 10 seconds. Now, the question that I've been asked a little bit is this a lot of damage? Should I be worrying about casting empowered spells off CD as soon as I get the Threads of Fate debuff? And I would say not really. I think the only time I've noticed it to be really impactful is particular to Mist of Tuna Scythe on the first boss. My record so far is during the burn on the first boss, as you guys know, after you kill the tree. I have managed to use Tip the Scales, used 3 empowered spells, getting them all my DPS, and having my in-hand shaman do almost 14 million damage. So that was pretty lucky. But again, it's not something you're going to notice like quite frequently. It's a small amount of damage and is only really good during heroism, cooldowns, and damage amplifications. Remember again, now I'm reaching the point where I'm going to be at the next boss soon. I kinda want to save stasis for the opener, even though it would probably be back, but you know, I could use it here if I wanted to. I always tell my team that they're completely okay if they drop a little bit here, because again, the whole thing is with Preservation and Spirit Bloom and Lifebind is I need to prep that up in that Lifebind window. All my healing here is about timing. If I mess up that timing, my team could die. So just telling your team that they're safe and not to panic is important, but at this point, they know that they're healing with my healing style, I guess, so they know that they're not going to die, but I always tell them not to press anything unless they actually really get scared. Preservation is a lot different than Resto Druid or Resto Shaman. I think, like, you know, you're always going to be topped and you have insane throughput, but those lulls or those dips are completely natural, especially if you're playing the way I'm playing with life binding, right? Because that does take multiple globals to get your team up, but it is like an instant lay on hands for the couple seconds after if you have some life spark procs and Spirit Bloom. As you can see, our timer's pretty good. We're gonna have Lust up in about 50 seconds. I really hate this part of the dungeon. I hate the fact that, you know, there's a very long RP that you have to wait here before the boss, even though you just did a bunch of RP. As you can see down there, my team, my Frost Mage, is hitting some of the yellow mobs. And my Shaman, I believe, goes and hits some mobs as well to keep his Tempest. We still do have 41 seconds on Lust. Corn Muffin's doing it for his Forset. Giant Monster seems to be good to go, so we're up, yeah. This is another boss that can kind of creep up on you in difficulty. I would say that this dungeon as a whole has 3 pretty difficult tyrannical bosses. The 2nd, the 3rd, and the 4th, all for different reasons. All of them are pretty high HPS requirements with defensive checks, as well as needing to coordinate your use of offensive healing capabilities to make sure your team can survive the encounter. The first phase of this fight predominantly involves healing through bleeds. In this composition specifically, we do have 2 cauterizes and a dwarf to make sure that we can get through the bleed debuffs if we need. I do prep stasis really early, and I do my same combo, which is my Lifebind, Spirit Bloom, and my Dream Breath. I choose not to cauterize myself here, I think, off the bat, because I wanted to see if I needed the damage for anything particular. I use Obsidian Scales, and that first stasis ramp is going to be released here on the first Icicles cast. If you are playing with a Shaman, they can use an ability called Jetstream, which clears the cast itself, the Icicles. However, if you are not playing with a Shaman, you're going to have to heal through it. You can dispel this buff, I just chose not to because all my passive healing was rolling, and all it does is a slow and a damage over time effect. You can see my group was baiting all these charges into the wall. This boss is notorious for making melee have a really hard time on hitting them, and making the boss go on a lot longer than needed. This phase of the fight is all tank damage, and as well a little bit of rod AoE. you're going to get 2 Rhyme Daggers that go into the tank, which is really passively healed through. So I make sure I heal this up quick. And then followed by this, you're going to have a big burst of AoE. I choose every time that this big burst of AoE comes out after the second Rhyme Dagger to either have one of 2 things. Emerald Communion or Rewind. By the time the third one comes around, you should have your stasis lined up for it in the queue if you're not using Flow State. This is assuming that you used your stasis on the start of the fight like I did to make sure you could handle the first icicles. It kind of feels like this fight goes through 3 periods. 1 is a heavy AoE damage, 2 is a heavy tank damage followed by light AoE damage, and 3 is just some kind of downtime, kind of like the next boss in the dungeon. Again, the daggers come out, and I'm prepping my next ramp. As you can see, I set up my stasis because it times up perfectly for this part of the dungeon. I get my same ramp going on with my Dream Breath, my Spirit Bloom, and my Temporal Anomaly. I choose to cauterize this time around on myself to make sure that I'm topped. I hit Obsidian Scales, I hit a Rescue, and I'm about to release my stasis. As you can see, my team there didn't really use too much. We didn't even use Mass Barrier for that, so we were pretty comfy. But making sure that you are getting a good practice of using things like your Obsidian Scales is going to help you a lot in this encounter. Again, the damage in this fight can actually creep up on you, and it's a little bit scary. So making sure that you are using defensives appropriately and committing offensives. Again, the time that you want to heal the most is during those first Rhyme Daggers. Everybody absolutely needs to be topped. And the second time, you're doing the Rhyme Dagger here with the tank. So as you can see, I get a little bit of rat healing out. And there we go, I top. And this time I think I hit Rewind. I do. But I think my Rewind was overkill. I think I didn't need to use that there at all. But for the purpose of this video, I think it is good to have coverage on every single one of these things to make sure people are topped. What you'll find again is I won't need Rewind for the next couple minutes to key, so even if I use it and the boss is low, it's completely okay. Again, we're baiting the charges into the walls where we can, and I'm back to blasting the boss. As you can see, my stasis is coming up in 4 seconds, and this is back into the dagger throw phase. So this is the phase where you can use your cauterize, and you can use anything you need to kind of keep up the team. One thing to note here is the only mistake that happened this entire dungeon is right here. I end up dying to this beam, which is kind of bullshit because I was right behind Brisky, but apparently I was there. I tell my team not to give the res and just use health pots. I think we should save the res just in case. Our team is top of the icicles. Even if I did take the res there, I wouldn't have had a healing ramp to be able to help them. Luckily, the boss goes down and we're okay. If I did manage to take that res, I would have had a couple options. I would have probably immediately resed, released my stasis, and started casting a Spirit Bloom, used Time Dilation, used Rescue, Scales, and Renewed Blaze to make sure I lived. But luckily my team was okay. When thinking about this trash, the biggest thing you need to consider is tank damage. In my Grimba 12 video, I talked a lot about how the only thing that really matters in all these keys is making sure your tank doesn't flop. Remember, if your tank does fall over in some of these pulls and you could have done something to save them, this could be the difference between you timing the key and losing it completely. Once your tank goes down, even if you battle res, there's a good chance that other DPS players are going to die, you might have to kite out a pack, and your whole team might perish. Losing 5 seconds, 10 seconds, or all your cooldowns could be very impactful to you timing the key. As you can see, even in this pack, I'm getting a ramp kind of set up, right? I want to make sure that my team's always top so they don't get hit by 2 daggers at once. This pack does actually do quite a bit of periodic party damage, so I am healing it up as much as I can. See, I rescue Hollow there. I see that he's getting dagger thrown and dagger thrown. I want to make sure that he's topped. This is another good pack where I always try to keep out Temporal Anomaly and reversions of my party, just to make sure that they have the Golden Hour or the Grace Spirit effect, which increases their healing by about 21%, just in case I need to do something like Spirit Bloom. I also use Dream Breath on CD to make sure that they have some passive healing. So again, same thing in this pack. You know, our tank's going to be taking a lot of damage. I'm sending out my Fire Breath, doing a little bit of damage myself, and I start ramping here a little bit. I'm watching my tank's defensives. He currently has no bubble, no spell ward, so I do decide, it looks like, yeah, perfect timing to decide to TDM. Out of his TD, you'll probably have something back up. So you can see this pack gets absolutely annihilated by our in-hand shaman. The next spec coming up is honestly, for our composition, pretty easy, but I could see why in Pugs that people struggle with this big beetle. In this comp, we have 4 Poison Dispels and Poison Cleansing Totem. Your Shaman, if you do choose to play with the DPS Shaman, which I think everybody should be this season, they do have Poison Cleansing Totem, which on the first Venomous Spit can always clear it, and they can do a Totemic Recall to get a second use. However, if you are not playing with a Shaman, you have to figure out how to do this Venomous Spit on your own. One trick that I would recommend trying to practice is having your Stasis ready and using Stasis to spell for this bomb. What you can do is, before going into this mob, you can press Stasis, you can press Dispel on 3 party members before the poison goes out, and when the Venomous Spit goes out, you can release your Stasis, dispelling 3 people in your party consecutively, and using that 4th Dispel on whoever didn't get hit. For instance, I could pre-dispel myself, Hollow the Mage, and Brisky, and then use my last Dispel, which didn't go on cooldown for Giant Monster. That could cover an entire round of Poison Dispel debuffs. Remember, if you are struggling, this is also a fine place to use Rewind, to use Emerald Communion, to use Tip the Scales, or if you just want to use your Stasis for throughput, that's completely fine too. Remember, you do also have Cauterize, which can get rid of a poison debuff completely. Cauterize is on a 1-minute CD, so I would use it a little bit more for emergencies, but even if it's on the first one, if you see somebody doesn't have a defensive, or maybe they stood in a puddle, Poison Spell and Cauterize are great. Another trick that I talked about in Arakara is if you have low Poison Dispels in your group on that last pack, choosing to dispel somebody else and using something like Renew and Blaze on yourself could be the difference between somebody living and dying. Renew and Blaze can probably keep you through the entire poison damage. This trash isn't anything too particular. I don't find these to be even that deadly, even on a plus 15. I found this trash to be really easy. However, the one thing I do want to think about is I don't want to commit anything before this boss. This boss is probably like one of the dark horses of this season. It's actually, pretty difficult. So making sure that I feel like I have every button on this boss is going to be really impactful. One thing to note too is having a Death Knight in your group on this boss is an absolute cheat code, and I know right now that I don't have that. Why is that? Is that Death Knight has AMS, Anti-Magic Shell. When using Anti-Magic Shell on this fight, they can actually soak a lot of the healing absorb orbs for free every 45 seconds, greatly reducing the healing requirement needed on this encounter. I do have 70% mana. I tell my tank I'm good to go whenever, and it's on him. I don't think I'm going to get mana checked in this fight, but I might get throughput checked a little bit if my team isn't careful. Before every stomp, I just want to make sure that my team is topped. As you can see, I'm not really using anything at the start of the fight. I do use a rescue, I do set out to Echoes, and I do Lifebind. I use a Life Spark proc to top my party, and our healing absorb starts to go up. The very first thing I do after that first stomp is start setting up my stasis. The reason why I set up my stasis here in my current talents with no flow state is because after our stomp, I'll be able to release it in the next phase, and I'll be able to use it for this phase of the fight going into the Dark Pulse. The Dark Pulse is the first AoE check of this encounter. We're going to get 2, maybe 3 of them over the fight, and you need to do a couple things. I'd recommend rotating Zephyr, personal cooldowns, rewind, and communion as needed. As you can see on this first one, I release my stasis into the first Dark Pulse. I have a big Spirit Bloom, and as well, I keep a Life Spark proc, and my team is very, very healthy. My Og did use his Scales there, my Shaman did use his Astral Shift, and my Mage did use his Mirror Images. Again, the biggest thing is making sure you have coverage for every Dark Pulse. During this part of the fight, with the Healing Orb debuffs, one thing that you're going to see I'm doing a lot is keeping Echoes on people, and I only start casting my Spirit Bloom or my Dream Breath after everybody's gotten some of the healing debuff. The reason why, again, is I want to make complete use of my Empowered spell. They do have long cooldowns, but they can top my entire party and clear most of the healing debuff just after one cast. So not panicking, if you do see somebody take a healing absorb, you don't have to worry about healing them up right away. What's important is they're healed up before the Vicious Darkness knockback. So again, my knockback's there. I use my Life Bind, my Spirit Bloom, and we're going to go into the next part of this fight, which is clearing up orbs again. So this time around, I do just get my stasis back just in time, and what you're going to notice here is I start getting echoes on everybody, I Life Bind, I stasis, I use my Tip the Scales, or sorry, just my Spirit Bloom, and I do set up my stasis here. I did make a pretty big mistake, and right away once I noticed I put a Chrono Flame on my stasis, I did just commit to rewind. My AUG did use Zephyr there, and we did use some defensive capabilities to make sure that was alive, but using rewind there is completely acceptable. One thing I would have done differently is I probably would have had a better stasis, and then tried to not use rewind so I could have had it up for the trash after this boss. However, like I said, it's completely okay to commit everything on this boss. I still have Emerald Communion. My team has been very healthy, and I've been following my cadence like really well in healing this. This wasn't challenging at all this time when I did it. Again, one thing I did note though is I do have Augmentation Evoker, and I do have Mage, which makes my throughput a lot stronger as compared to the first time I timed this key. I do send out a rescue there, I send out some echoes, I Life Bind, and I Dream Breath this time. And then I'm just back to blasting the boss. I do hope that we beat this next Dark Pulse. However, if we do get it, one thing to note is I do have Emerald Communion ready. So saving a offensive healing spell for every Dark Pulse is pretty important. Emerald Communion was my last resort there, however I did really want to save it for the big beetle at the end of the dungeon. As you can see, we still only have one death in the instance, we have about 10 minutes left, and all we do is have 3 trash mobs. Again, we're fighting one of these guys, this big UG here. He doesn't really do much. Again, I would try to advise not using too much because you want everything for the next pack. If you are in communication with your team, I would recommend telling them that they should save their offensive capabilities for the beetle. The beetle is not only an HPS requirement, it is a defensive check. It's probably the hardest single mob I think this entire season. I don't know why they've tuned it to be as difficult as it is, but as preservation, you shouldn't struggle too much if you have your buttons. However, one thing is that if you panic on Prez, that beetle becomes very difficult. The reason why is, again, there's periodic damage that comes out in healing, and if people aren't using their defensives during the overlap, such as the slam, you're going to find it absolutely impossible to heal. I find that this is one mob which being in communication with your team is actually exceptionally helpful. So you can see, as soon as you pull the beetle, we're going to get a Ravenous Swarm here. So I'm making sure that I have my Grace Periods out, I have my Echoes out, I hit Renewing Blaze, I hit my Stasis, I hit my Tip the Scales, my Spirit Bloom, my TA, and my Dream Breath. I'm holding on to my Stasis here for the release on the next Swarm. And there's my Life Bind, and there's my Stasis release. So now, again, I told my DPS that they should hold damage for the Hulking Warshell. If this did manage to go on, there is a nasty overlap, I think, on the 4th Swarm, as well as this one being a little nasty. That second one is actually kind of difficult too, because you do finish the Swarm right at the same time as you get the Slam. I tell my team here that we're completely fine, however this next one is going to be the overlap if we get it. We do get this last Swarm, I do hit Renewing Blaze, but the mob does go down. Again, I have every healing button right now. If I needed to use Communion there, if I needed to use another Charge of Scales, if I needed Brisky Zephyr, if I needed Time Dilation somebody, all of those are available to me and I could use them. When thinking about your group, if you see somebody not having defensive or you're struggling, use Time Dilation as an external defensive on those people on that mob. Feel free to use Tip the Scales, use your Communion, use your Stasis, and follow that same pattern. Echo, 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 Verdant Embrace into Life Bind into Spirit Bloom. You'll notice that every single time if you do that, you'll be able to heal every single one of the swarms very easily. This mini boss is quite easy. The only thing you need to make sure of is that everybody's topped for the entire part of the Umbral Weave. And into this boss, you're going to notice the same thing. The Umbral Weave is almost a one-shot check, so if people are not topped, they are going to die. I'm trying my best here to get back some mana with Energy Loop. Again, I decided to run Energy Loop instead of time I need this dungeon, which is a common theme, which maybe I'll talk about in a later video, but I find this is another dungeon where, as you can see, we drop to 10% on almost every mechanic on every fight. Running time of need just kind of gets munched and becomes useless here, at least on the ski level. I'm getting a quick drink, and I tell my tank that I'm ready to go whenever. I do not need a lot of mana for this fight. The cadence is very straightforward, and my rhythm is already figured out since I've healed this fight before. One thing to note when starting this fight, for every single one of the splices, you should do two things. One is you should think about what defensive you have, whether it's Renewing Blaze or Scales, and then doing the same combo is Echo, 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 Lifebind. And this first one I use Tip the Scales and Stasis to make sure my team's top tier. And there we go. So now I have a complete stasis ramp for the next one. I used my Renewing Blaze on first, so I assume here, and I don't remember, but I think I used Obsidian Scales. So I do Echo, Echo, Echo. I Lifebind, and I hold my stasis for a second so that everybody can tick down. And we're completely topped. I Spirit Bloom instantly, and it looks like my party didn't even take damage. So my whole team's freaking out in chat, being like, wow, we didn't take any damage. But we did use Mass Barrier there too. And I think we had Eon Shield, so pretty overkill. The second phase of the fight is the process of elimination. So you get kind of a breather for AoE healing, and you might need to heal your tank. If you are playing with anything that's not a prop paladin or a brewmaster, chances are if it's a VDH or prot warrior, they might need a little bit of healing, so make sure you're ready with some echoes and golden hours for them. Again, I Lifebind here with Renewing Blaze, I Spirit Bloom, and I Life Spark proc, and my party is just absolutely topped. I did make a little blunder there, but we were okay with the rescue shield, is I didn't top Brisky off in time, but he ended up being okay. Make sure that at least for the Umbral Weave that everybody's topped in every single global. This is where I choose to use my Communion because I don't have Stasis, don't have Tip of Skills or anything, so I tell my team that they're completely fine here. And again, we're back into repeat. We're back into the process elimination phase, which means I get a breather for healing, and my tank goes to the middle. This one, he does decide to Guardian Ancient Kings, he does have some Wogs, and he's fine. As you can see, this entire fight, I am rolling reversions on all of my team members, right? I want that, I want my Life Spark procs for my Lifebind, and I want my Grace Period active. I Echo, 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 I Renew and Blaze, I Lifebind, I Tip the Scales, I Stasis, I get my Dream Breath and my TA out, I Rescue Shield, and my party is completely topped. Even without Augmentation Evoker, even without Mage, even running very low Mastery, which I always do, if you follow this combo, your team will be topped on every single one. One thing to note is you can tell like I'm waiting a second before I actually release my Stasis and my casts because Splice is pretty long. So I want to make sure that everybody's getting the full healing benefit out of it before I actually release it. Because Stasis releases all those spells in sequence, waiting a second for your Lifebind for last possible tick is going to make sure that all your healing goes out in the last couple seconds of Splice. Again, I barely spent any mana this fight, I'm following the same cadence. I'm doing pretty good deep single target DPS to the boss, and I'm just blasting. At this point, I have not had to use Time Dilation once because I felt very, very safe. However, you can feel the need to use it. Again, here, I think I end up just using Rewind anyway because, you know, I'm just not using it for the rest of the fight. The fight's like over, right? So again, and like a lot of times you'll see in my videos, I only use Rewind as a kind of emergency. Some bosses, like second boss in Dawnbreaker, I think Rewind's very good for filling gaps. But right here, right, like we've made it through this entire fight and there's been absolutely no healing problems. We've been top for the entire encounter. But one thing you can note is every single time you notice that I always have an Obsidian Scales or a Renewing Blaze for every single one of the mechanics. And there you have it. I got a nice +1 point for this key. Really proud of this one. And I think this is a really, really fun healing key. I think this is a good way to test your AoE healing capabilities, your use of defensives, and your movement. This last boss involves a ton of moving and can be kind of scary. Making sure that you're always echoing while you're moving, keeping those grace periods up, and getting into that Lifebind window will ensure that you have a good success in being able to heal this encounter. Again, thanks for tuning in. I hope this video was helpful for you getting through City of Threads, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Remember, feel free to check out my Discord or my Twitch if you have any specific questions regarding Preservation Evoker, if you're looking for my UI, my weak auras, or just any questions in general.